The keys felt cold in his hand, small, insignificant things made of metal and plastic, yet holding the weight of my world. I watched him hold them out. Not to me. Not to the person who had bought the car, who had driven it for years, who had polished its hood until it gleamed like obsidian under streetlights, but to her. My sister. Her hand, hesitant but reaching, closed around them. The air in the driveway turned brittle. I stood frozen, the sunset bleeding orange behind the familiar shape of my car, parked there just moments ago, solid and reliable. Now it felt alien, stolen in plain sight. My husband stood between us, a barrier of casual cruelty, a smug smile playing on his lips. He looked at me, his eyes devoid of warmth, then back at her, a performative generosity softening his features. "She needs it more," he said, the words landing like stones in still water, rippling outwards, shattering the reflection of everything I thought I knew. "She deserves it. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know." The car wasn't just a car. It was independence. It was late-night grocery runs when I couldn't sleep, windows down, volume up. It was the smell of stale coffee and the faint scent of the cheap pine tree air freshener I always forgot to replace. It was mine. I had saved for it, painstakingly, dollar by dollar, before we were married, before our finances merged into a muddy, shared pool where somehow my contributions always seemed to evaporate faster than his. He had contributed to some of the maintenance over the years, sure, but the down payment, the bulk of the loan, the feeling of signing those papers and driving it off the lot, that was all me. It represented a time when I stood on my own 2 feet, when my accomplishments felt undeniably my own. And now, with a flick of his wrist, a couple of dismissive words, he had handed it over. To my sister. My younger sister, Sarah. Sarah, who had always been the fragile one, the needy one, the one who required rescuing. Not by me, not usually, but by life, by circumstances, by others. And now, apparently, by my husband, using my property. The full force of his words hit me a beat later. She deserves it more than me. What had I done to suddenly become undeserving? What cosmic scale had tipped in Sarah's favor while I was apparently found wanting? I looked at him, searching for a flicker of regret, a hint that this was a joke, a misunderstanding. There was nothing but that infuriatingly calm, self-satisfied smirk. He truly believed he was doing something noble, something right. In his eyes, I had too much, or perhaps I simply wasn't as worthy of his generosity, even if that generosity came at my expense. Sarah stood there, the keys clutched in her hand, her eyes darting between me and him. She looked uncomfortable, caught in the middle, but she didn't protest. She didn't say, "No, I can't take this, it's hers." She just held the keys, a silent accomplice to the theft of my independence. The first few days were a blur of disbelief and simmering rage. I felt stranded. The bus routes in our neighborhood were terrible. Work became a complicated logistical nightmare. Simple errands required planning like a military operation. It wasn't just the inconvenience. It was the constant, gnawing reminder of what he had done. Every time I had to ask him for a ride, every time I waited at a bus stop in the rain, the betrayal felt fresh, a gaping wound that refused to close. I tried to talk to him, to make him see how wrong this was, how fundamentally unfair. He just deflected. "You have my car you can use sometimes," he'd say, conveniently forgetting that his car was a beat-up old truck that barely started and smelled faintly of stale fast food. "Besides, you work from home mostly now." Sarah needs it for her job. Sarah worked retail, shifts varied, sometimes walkable depending on the store location. My work involved client meetings often across town. His arguments were paper-thin, designed not to convince, but to shut down conversation. "But why my car?" I pressed, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Why not sell the truck and get her something? Or help her get a loan?" He sighed, a show of weary patience that grated on my nerves. "Because this is easier." And frankly, he leaned in, his voice dropping, casual and cutting. "You've been taking me for granted. Maybe this will make you appreciate what you have. Or had. The implication hung in the air that this wasn't just about Sarah's need, but a punishment. For what? For being independent? For not conforming to his expectations? The gaslighting was subtle, insidious. He wasn't just taking my car, he was trying to dismantle my sense of self-worth. I tried talking to Sarah. I called her, my voice strained. Sarah, about the car. Do you understand what happened? She was quiet for a moment.
Yeah, he said.
He said you weren't using it much anyway, and that I really needed it. But Sarah, I bought that car. Every penny of it. It's mine. I know, she said softly. It just felt like he was trying to help. Help who? At my expense. My voice was rising despite myself. Did you think it was okay to just take it? She became defensive then. He offered. What was I supposed to say? No? Look, I'm sorry if you're mad, but I really do need reliable transport right now. My old car finally died, you know that. I did know that. And I had offered to help her look for a new one, maybe even loan her a down payment. But he had swooped in first, with a grand gesture that made him look like the hero and me, somehow, the villain for protesting the theft of my own property. The conversation ended poorly. She accused me of being selfish, of not understanding her struggle. I accused her of being complicit. The rift between us, already present due to years of unspoken family dynamics, widened into a chasm. Now I had lost not just my car, but seemingly my sister's understanding, perhaps even her affection. I was alone in this, battling two people who should have been on my side. The feeling of isolation was suffocating. I felt like I was screaming underwater, unheard, unseen, as my life was casually rearranged by someone else's capricious will. Every day brought a new challenge, a missed appointment because the bus was late, having to decline a last-minute invitation because I had no way to get there, the sheer exhaustion of navigating a world designed for people with reliable transportation. The initial rage began to cool, replaced by a cold, heavy despair. It felt like they had stacked the deck against me, and I had no cards left to play. I spent weeks like this, feeling sorry for myself, feeling victimized, trapped in a narrative where my husband was the powerful villain and I was the helpless damsel in distress. I complained to friends, I vented in online forums, I cried myself to sleep. But none of it changed anything. The car was still gone. My husband was still smug. My sister was still driving my car, probably telling herself she deserved it. The despair deepened into a heavy, soul-crushing weight. I started to believe their narrative, that maybe I was selfish, maybe I did deserve to be taught a lesson. The fight was draining me, and for what? To get back a car? It felt pointless. Then, one miserable rainy Tuesday, waiting 20 minutes for a bus that never showed, huddled under a flimsy umbrella as traffic splashed water onto my jeans, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a sudden burst of anger, but a cold, quiet realization. I wasn't a damsel. I wasn't helpless. I was just acting like one. I was letting them define me, define my worth, define my situation. They had taken my car, yes, but they had also tried to take my spirit, my autonomy. And that I couldn't let them have. The rain felt colder suddenly, not just on my skin, but deep inside. I felt a flicker, then a spark, of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Resolve. This wasn't just about the car anymore. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my narrative. I wouldn't be the passive victim. I would be the one who took control. I would find a way to turn this around, not just to get back what was mine, but to expose the rotten core of his actions, to show my sister the truth, and to stand tall again. The wait for the bus no longer felt like a punishment, but a moment of clarity. I pulled out my phone, not to check the bus schedule, but to start a different kind of search. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning, and I was done playing by their rules. My plan began to take shape, piece by piece. It wasn't about confrontation through anger or emotional appeals. I had tried that and it had failed. This required strategy. I needed to understand why he felt so entitled to give away my property, beyond his flimsy excuses. I started paying closer attention, noticing patterns I'd previously dismissed. His casual dismissiveness of my work, his subtle control over finances, his need to be seen as the benevolent provider even when providing with someone else's resources. He didn't see me as an equal partner. He saw me as an extension of himself, someone whose assets were interchangeable with his own, to be distributed as he saw fit. He was building his own image as the generous savior, and Sarah was a convenient recipient who amplified that image, especially when contrasted with the ungrateful wife. The key, I realized, wasn't just proving the car was mine, which was easily verifiable. It was about striking at the heart of his self-righteous narrative and simultaneously opening Sarah's eyes. Sarah wasn't inherently malicious, just perhaps naive and easily influenced, especially by someone presenting themselves as a rescuer. She had always looked up to him, seen him as successful and stable. If she truly believed she deserved the car more, it was likely because he had manipulated her into believing she was more in need, and perhaps that I had more than enough. The truth I held, the secret I had kept for years, suddenly felt less like a quiet act of love and more like a strategic weapon. It was the truth about Sarah's college tuition. Years ago, when Sarah was desperate to go to a particular university but couldn't afford it, when scholarships fell through and loans weren't enough, I had quietly paid a significant portion of her tuition. Not a loan, a gift. I hadn't told anyone. Not Sarah, not my husband, not her parents. Sarah knew some anonymous donor had helped, someone connected to the university, or so she was told through a carefully constructed lie involving the financial aid office. I had arranged it all through a third party, an old friend who worked in university administration, ensuring my name was never attached. Sarah had thanked the anonymous donor profusely in emails to the financial aid office, emails my friend forwarded to me. It was a sacrifice for me at the time, requiring me to live extremely frugally, but seeing Sarah get her degree had been worth it. Now, that secret held immense power. It proved my generosity towards Sarah, not just financial, but in keeping it quiet, allowing her to feel she had achieved her degree through her own merit and some mysterious good fortune, rather than family charity. More importantly, it proved that my husband was not the only source of support in her life, and that his assertion that she deserved the car because of her need was blind, or worse, willfully ignorant of what I had already done for her, far beyond the value of the car. He had been giving away my possession, rationalizing it by pointing to a need I had already quietly helped fulfill in a far more significant way. Gathering the proof was simple. Emails between me and my friend, bank transfer records showing the large sums going to the university's account with specific student IDs attached, Sarah's student ID. It was all there, neatly documented. I didn't need to get anything. I already had everything I needed. The realization was empowering. I wasn't powerless. I had simply chosen, until now, not to reveal the extent of my agency, my quiet strength. The tension in the house was a physical thing. My husband sensed a shift in me. The passive victim was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful determination he couldn't quite decipher. He seemed wary, less prone to his usual casual barbs, as if waiting for me to make a move. Sarah occasionally texted, hesitant, maybe feeling the chill that had settled between us. I replied minimally, keeping her at a distance. I needed the revelation to come as a complete shock, untainted by preliminary attempts at reconciliation or explanation. The plan was to force a confrontation. Not a yelling match, but a controlled unveiling of the truth. I needed both of them there. I invited Sarah over for dinner. My husband was surprised. He'd assumed we weren't speaking. I simply said calmly, "She's my sister." "We need to talk," he agreed, curious, maybe anticipating a chance to play the mediator or reinforce his position. I chose a neutral ground within the house, the dining room, formal, open, no easy escape. I set the table meticulously, a veneer of normalcy over the impending storm. Waiting for them felt like waiting for a verdict. My stomach was a knot of nerves, but beneath it, a core of steel had formed. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about my identity, about whether I would allow myself to be diminished and dismissed. They arrived separately. Sarah first, looking nervous, clutching her keys, my keys. Then him, radiating a false sense of ease. We sat down. The small talk was awkward, strained. I didn't touch the food. My hands were steady on the table. I cleared my throat. Thank you both for coming. My voice was low, calm, devoid of emotion. This wasn't about feeling anymore. It was about execution. I ask you here because we need to discuss the situation with the car. My husband immediately puffed up. Look, I thought we were past this, he began, launching into his usual script about Sarah's need and my supposed excess. She needed it, you weren't using it as much, it made sense. It was the right thing to do, he glanced at Sarah, seeking her agreement, a conspiratorial nod. Sarah mumbled something about being grateful. I held up a hand, stopping his flow. Stop. Let's talk about need and deserving. You seem to have a very particular definition of both. I looked at my husband. You gave away my car, something I worked hard for, claiming Sarah deserved it more because of her financial struggles, her need for transportation. You painted yourself as her savior, helping her when her own sister apparently wouldn't. My voice remained steady, but the air grew thick. He frowned, sensing the shift. That's not fair.
I was just trying to help her out.
Help her out, I repeated, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. Like I helped her out when she needed to pay for college. Sarah's head snapped up. She looked confused. My husband looked utterly blindsided. His smugness vanished, replaced by a blank stare. College? What are you talking about? I turned to Sarah. Sarah, do you remember the anonymous donor who helped you pay for university? The one you were told was somehow connected to the financial aid office. She nodded slowly, her eyes wide, fixed on mine.
Yes.
They paid for most of my second and third years. I looked back at my husband, his face pale. That wasn't an anonymous donor from the university, was it, Sarah? I met her gaze. It was me. The silence that fell was absolute, deafening. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each tick a hammer blow against the facade my husband had built. My husband looked from me to Sarah, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. He seemed incapable of processing the information. His eyes darted between us, searching for a lie, a retraction, anything but the truth hanging heavy in the air. Sarah stared at me, her face a mask of shock, then disbelief, then dawning understanding. The gratitude she had felt for a faceless stranger, the guilt she might have felt accepting the car from my husband at my expense, it was all being recontextualized in real time. I laid the documents on the table, the email exchanges, the bank records. Here, I said, my voice still calm, cold. The transfers, the dates, the amounts. Paid directly to the university, with your student ID, Sarah. I slid the papers towards her. Thousands. Enough to cover tuition and some books. More than enough to buy you several cars, in fact. Sarah picked up the papers, her hand shaking. She scanned them, her eyes widening further with each line. The color drained from her face. My husband finally found his voice, but it was a strangled sound.
You
did this?
Why?
Why didn't you tell me? The accusation in his voice was absurd, but fear was starting to creep in, replacing the shock. Fear of what this revealed about him, about his ignorance, about his false narrative of being the primary benefactor. Why didn't I tell you? I repeated, allowing a hint of the buried pain to surface. Because it wasn't about you. It was about helping my sister. And because I knew, I looked him dead in the eye, that you would have found a way to make it about you. To take credit, or worse, to tell me I was being foolish with my money. Sarah looked up from the papers, her eyes glistening. She looked at me, then at my husband, a complete shift happening in her expression. The discomfort she'd shown earlier vanished, replaced by a deep, crushing realization. She saw him not as her rescuer, but as a man who had belittled and stolen from the very person who had quietly given her a future.
He said
I deserved the car more, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, looking not at him, but at the table. Because I struggled. Because I needed help, she trailed off, the implication hanging heavy that he had used her perceived need as a justification for his theft, completely unaware, or perhaps deliberately ignoring, the scale of my previous help. My husband spluttered, trying to regain control.
That's
Different. That was years ago. The car is about now. Is it? I challenged, raising an eyebrow. Or is it about you feeling entitled to take what's mine and hand it out to feel important? You took my car, the symbol of my independence, and gave it to the sister whose education I privately funded. You didn't know this. I gestured to the papers, because you don't pay attention unless it serves your own narrative. You assumed I was less generous, less supportive, less deserving than you. You were wrong. Sarah slowly reached into her pocket. She pulled out the keys. My keys. Her hand trembled as she held them out to me across the table. Her eyes were full of tears, but also something else. Clarity, regret, and a nascent anger directed elsewhere. I can't, she choked out, her voice barely audible. I didn't know.
I'm so sorry.
I took the keys from her hand. They felt warm now, familiar, returning to where they belonged. The simple act felt monumental, a physical manifestation of the balance being restored. My husband watched the exchange, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. His carefully constructed image lay in ruins at his feet. He hadn't just been wrong, he had been spectacularly, ignorantly wrong, and caught red-handed in a petty act of theft while being blind to a significant act of love and sacrifice performed by the person he was trying to diminish. He wasn't the hero, he was the fool and the thief. He pushed back from the table violently, scraping the chair against the floor. This is unbelievable, he roared, the calm facade completely shattered. You manipulated this. You kept this a secret just to make me look bad. No, I said, my voice regaining some of its strength, no longer needing to be calm. I kept it a secret because it was a gift, given without expectation of credit. It only became relevant when you decided to measure our worth and generosity using my car as currency. You exposed yourself, not me. He stood there, fuming, defeated. Sarah was openly crying now, looking between us with a mixture of sorrow and disgust. The air was thick with the debris of shattered trust and exposed lies. The dinner I had prepared sat untouched, a silent witness to the implosion. The aftermath was quiet, heavy. My husband stormed out shortly after, unable to bear the weight of his exposed hypocrisy and the silent condemnation from Sarah. Sarah stayed. She couldn't look me in the eye for a while, just sat there, tracing patterns on the table. I feel like such an idiot, she finally whispered, her voice raw.
He made it sound like
you were doing fine and I was struggling, and he was helping me. He always made it sound like he was the one looking out for me. He was looking out for himself, I said softly, the anger draining away, leaving a profound sadness in its wake. He needed to feel like the rescuer. He needed to feel superior. Using my car, claiming you deserved it more than me. It was a way for him to feel powerful, to cut me down and lift himself up in your eyes, all while spending none of his own resources. She finally looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. And all this time, you did that for me? And you never said anything? I shrugged. It wasn't about getting thanks. It was about helping you get where you needed to go. Like the car was supposed to help me get where I needed to go, the parallel wasn't lost on either of us. I had helped her on a foundational level, enabling her future, quietly and without fanfare. He had performed a showy act of help by taking away my mobility, creating hardship for me while puffing up his own image. She handed the keys back to me again, properly this time, a gesture of returning something rightfully mine. I'm so sorry, she repeated, tears flowing freely. For everything. For taking it, for not seeing. It's okay, I said, taking the keys. It wasn't entirely okay, not yet, but the chasm between us had closed. She saw the truth now, not just about the car, but about the dynamics at play. She saw who had truly supported her, and who had used her situation for their own gain. The car sat in the driveway, no longer a symbol of betrayal, but of a truth revealed, a connection restored. Getting the car back was just the physical return of property. The real victory was the dismantling of his lie, the shift in Sarah's perception, the reclaiming of my own narrative. The marriage, of course, didn't survive the exposure. The trust was shattered, the power dynamic irrevocably shifted. He couldn't stand the sight of me, the living embodiment of his most humiliating defeat. He couldn't stand that Sarah, his intended audience for his false magnanimity, now saw him for what he was. The car feels different now. It's not just a car anymore. It's a monument to quiet strength, to the power of unseen actions, to the unexpected places truth can be hidden. It's a reminder that sometimes the most devastating weapons are not loud and obvious, but simple, documented facts about past kindnesses. I drive it now with a different kind of freedom, not just physical freedom, but the freedom that comes from knowing your own worth, from having stood up for yourself, from having turned the tables on someone who thought they held all the power. The road ahead feels open, a little uncertain perhaps, but entirely mine to travel. And I'm not looking in the rearview mirror anymore. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.